The Center for Simplified Strategic Planning embarked on a journey to analyze why so many acquisitions fail to live up to expectations. Today's presentation will cover the 8 steps that you can take to raise your acquisition success. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them into the questions box. Denise will handle questions at the end of the presentation. Today's speaker, Denise Harrison, is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Center for Simplified Strategic Planning, and she will be presenting her findings on how you can raise your acquisition batting average. Denise brings a wealth of hands-on experience to this project. Prior to working for the Center for Simplified Strategic Planning, Denise worked for a Fortune 500 company holding a variety of positions, including president of one of their divisions, and then moved to president of a financial services firm. Denise, we look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Dana. So acquisitions, what is the problem? Well, I'd like to start out with a quote from the Wall Street Journal. 80% of acquisitions fail to meet the buyer's expectations. 80%, wow, that's a huge number. And of course, we've seen large acquisitions just go down in flames. We saw the Daimler-Benz Chrysler end in tragedy. AOL, Time Warner, unsuccessful. Caterpillar very recently bought a Chinese manufacturer of mining company, and that was unsuccessful. So as Dana mentioned, the Center for Simplified Strategic Planning embarked on a journey to analyze why so many acquisitions fail to live up to expectations. And we found there were 8 significant strategic reasons why acquisitions fail. My goal is to present this criteria so that you will learn from this experience and it will raise your acquisition batting average. This, once again, is a strategic view. So we know that due diligence, the normal financial due diligence, is very important, and there's certainly things that can go on with that. But we're going to focus this from a strategic view and give you a checklist of things to look at. Now, during this presentation, we've made some assumptions. We are assuming that your company has decided that an acquisition is the right way to go. So, in order to do that, previously you've had to have a strategy, and then during the strategy you've wanted to supplement what you're doing, and you had to look at a make versus buy decision. We are, in this presentation, making the assumption that the decision to go ahead and buy is what you've decided to do. Additionally, we will make the assumption that you are going to evaluate multiple companies, and in fact this is one area where people sometimes fail, in that they look at only one company, a company that's available as the possible solution, without truly understanding what they might be missing because they haven't looked at other potential target candidates, even though they may not be available, at least not available on the surface. It's important when you look at an acquisition that you understand what you're not looking at and what you're not buying, and that you do not consider one company in a vacuum. But let's go to those 8 criteria. These 8 criteria fit into 3 different buckets. The first bucket is strategic fit. The second bucket will be human capital. And the third bucket will be market and industry dynamics. So I'm going to quickly give an overview of all 8 of the criteria and then go into a deep dive on each one. So in the strategic fit bucket, the first one is, how does this acquisition fit with our strategy, and will it achieve the goals set out in our strategic plan? Now, you'd think this one would be obvious, but when we actually did the research, we found that, in fact, a lot of times people lost their way. They would start out with an acquisition trying to achieve certain goals and objectives, but when you looked at the acquisition, it really didn't meet those goals and objectives. So we're going to take a look at what might have happened there. Next, is there any excess baggage? So let's say you found a target that actually does achieve your strategic goals and objectives. What about some of the other things that come along with it? The markets that you're not really interested in, or the products and services that you're not really interested in. We'll talk about what you need to do about that. The next area, human capital. There are 3 criteria that fall into this. One, competencies. What competencies does the target company have? Are they strategic, or are they really strategic assets? Understanding the differential advantage is important, but more importantly, you need to understand is if that is replicable and will it survive the acquisition. Next, company culture. Many acquisitions fail not because they were a poor target, but because the two company cultures clashed and the acquisition was not a success. And finally, in the human capital area, key people. Who are they? Will they stay? This is yet another area that sometimes cause acquisitions to go off track. The third bucket is the market or industry criteria, and we have three here also. First, market position. Do you really understand what position the acquired company has and what position it has in each one of its market segments? What are the industry dynamics? Are there significant threats, regulations, new technology? And how does the competitive landscape change once you've made this acquisition? At this point, we're going to go into a deep dive at each one of these criteria and understand what it is that we really need to look at. So strategic fit. You would think that this would be pretty obvious if you're going to make the effort to actually acquire another company. But you need to be clear and make sure these are articulated up front. So what are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to accomplish core market expansion and consolidate your industry? So we see many small to mid-sized companies, their competitors, which were founded by baby boomers, are now ready to retire and they're desiring to sell their business. This is a great way to consolidate. So core market expansion is one area you might want to accomplish as you develop your strategic goals. New channel. Do you want to start selling to big box stores? And your acquisition, your goal is to have your target company actually be positioned in the big box stores so that you are acquiring the company for that market position. Or are you going to go into a new market? An example would be Google. Google is very well known on the internet, but they didn't have any space in the video part of the internet. So in order to get that space, they went ahead and bought YouTube. What about new products that you'd like to sell in existing markets? Well, in one of our examples, we're going to be using a healthcare company to show you how, while this could be a strategy, what can go awry when you do that. Or develop a new skill. For instance, eBay knows that it will only be successful as long as the transactions to purchase its goods are perceived to be safe. So they looked at buying PayPal in order to ensure that their transactions would be safe to protect their customers from fraudulent transactions. So where can things go wrong in strategic fit? And that is when you don't have your clearly articulated goals. So it's important to have a great strategy, to have made that make versus buy decision, and in this case, if you're going after an acquisition, you're going to be buying, and to have these goals in writing so that as you evaluate acquisition targets, you can hold them up against the criteria that you have set out. So where does the train go off the track? We find that as people start pursuing different targets, companies become available. And while the companies do achieve some of the goals and objectives, they're really not good fits. But in the heat of the battle, people fall in love with these companies and lose sight of the overall objective. So it's important that you have that strategy, your goals and objectives in place and clearly articulated, and that you consistently look at your target companies up against what you're trying to achieve. But that's not all in strategic fit. Another area where we find things go off track is what comes along with the acquisition. So you find a company, a target company that fits your goals and objectives, but it's in some market segments that you're not really interested in, or it has some products that you're not really interested in. What do you do? Well, you really have to understand the target companies' markets that they serve and what are the other products and services, and have a plan for these areas either before the acquisition, so perhaps selling them off, or in fact, once you have the acquisition, to sell them off or at least have an idea of what you want to do with them strategically. What happens if you don't have this? Well, here's an example of a healthcare company. They were expanding internationally, and as it turns out, the international markets are different from the U.S. markets when it comes to the healthcare industry. And they found to be successful internationally, they had to have a product that was not needed in the United States. So, good news, they found a target company that had exactly the product they needed, and they were even in the international markets. But in addition to this, they found that this company had some other market segments that it was serving, the government segment. It was also serving a number of different areas. But when we brought the acquisition in-house, the company found that instead of really focusing on making the international markets a success, they looked at all of the different markets and decided they wanted to make a go of all the different markets. Well, here's what happened. In the product development area, they ended up with too many requests. So they decided perhaps we can have one device, and ideally this device will meet multiple market needs. Well, unfortunately, when you try to develop a device that has to meet multiple market needs, the time frame from development was extended out, and it was extended out further and further. And finally, to get it to market, we sort of gave the key features a haircut. So two things happened. One, we had a device that met a number of market needs, but they didn't fit all of the needs of any markets. So it was okay, but it wasn't great in any specific market. And the market development time had been extended significantly because it was trying to meet all these market needs. Unfortunately, this caused the acquisition to be a success because the product was not good at meeting any specific market needs, and it really wasn't a great product, and it didn't enable them to gain market share. The whole acquisition ended up imploding and just being a very, very bad experience. And this is what happens when you lose sight of the overall strategic fit you were trying to accomplish. You need to stick with that when you actually acquire the company. You need to stick with those objectives. But excess baggage can often cause you to lose focus and dilute your efforts. So it's important when you look at an acquisition target, you understand what it is you're buying it for, and be sure you know what you're going to do with that area, but also understand what you're going to do with the excess baggage so that your efforts don't get diluted. So in the strategic fit area, it's important to have your strategic objectives clearly stated and to also understand what you're doing with your excess baggage. And these are two key points I'd like you to walk away with today.
Denise, you make an interesting point about excess baggage. I hadn't realized that this excess was responsible for pulling companies off track. I know that many companies focus on the financial areas and their due diligence in those areas, and that's very important. But you found that human capital is a subject that is often overlooked. I'm looking forward to hearing about what you found in this area.
Thanks, Dana. Well, there are three real big topics in this area. Human capital, first, you are buying the company probably because it's differentiated in the marketplace, or ideally you're finding a company that's differentiated in the marketplace. And what allows it to be differentiated? And this goes into the market of strategic competencies. And this whole topic is what is the intellectual capital that you have inside your company that sets you apart and gives you a sustainable competitive advantage. And you need to understand what differentiates the target company in the marketplace, but then you need to understand how is that resident within the company. So are these competencies documented? How is the knowledge shared for these differential advantage? Is there a training program that allows people to really get good in whatever skill it is that differentiates you in the marketplace? Is this training formal, or is it hands-on, or is it some combination of both? How do new employees learn this differential advantage? What are the skills, processes, and knowledge that they need to become really, really good at so we can keep this differential advantage on in the marketplace? Are the specific skill sets required across the company, or are they resident just in one person? Because if one person is providing you with your differential advantage, then that person is a strategic asset. And the problem with a human strategic asset is, unfortunately, these assets have legs and they can walk out of the company. We call this, in small to mid-sized companies, the mad scientist problem. This is where sometimes this is the person who's been responsible for a lot of your product development, but you don't have anyone coming up underneath that person enabling the product development to continue. So it's important to understand, A, what the differential advantage is, B, what are the skills, processes, and knowledge that support that differential advantage, and are they replicable in the company, or are they a strategic asset? So let me give you an example. We've already talked about eBay a little bit, and they knew it was important to have payments secure, and they decided rather than making it, they could buy it. So they looked at all the different payment companies and found that PayPal was head and shoulders above other firms. Their fraud prevention knowledge, when they looked at PayPal, their fraud prevention knowledge was not resident in a single person. As a matter of fact, they had a very stringent training program so that all new employees would learn the current state of the technology and the processes that were in place that enabled the PayPal system to remain secure. But they constantly updated the system, and they were constantly looking for new ways that they could thwart the devious criminal minds who kept developing new and different techniques. So there were a couple things that eBay was looking at. The first one was, A, is the actual differential advantage documented? B, is it being taught? And C, is it still developing? So is it not at a stagnant state? And this is what made this acquisition a success. They checked to make sure that all those pieces were in place. So when we looked at different companies and why different areas, different acquisitions failed, we found that sometimes a company was acquired for a differential advantage, but once the acquisition was complete, they found that differential advantage was resident in one person, and that person, if they walked, all of a sudden the company was really not achieving the goals and objectives that were set out in the original strategy. Next on the human capital side is company culture.
Next slide.
Thank you. Next, human capital. How are decisions made? Top down, bottom up, consensus? What stories are told within the company? Looking at the stories that are told in the company is very important to telling you something about the company's culture. So the famous story that we discuss is 3M. 3M, we all know the story of the person who developed Post-it notes and brought it to the senior management team. Nope, they thought that was a bad idea. So the person who developed Post-it notes gave it to the secretaries, and they loved them. But still the management team said, nah, this is just a flaky idea. Never mind, turned it down. So what did the Post-it note developer do? He took the Post-it notes away, and the secretaries and administrative staff were upset. And because they were so upset, senior management said, hey, wait a minute, this might be a really, really good idea. Well, this is one of the stories that's told within 3M. And in telling this in 3M, it tells the story of perseverance, but it also tells the story of innovation. So with any acquisition target, listen to the stories that are being told, and that will give you some idea of the character of the company. Next, are decisions made top down or bottom up? Are you given a chance to have a consensus before you move forward? Well, here's an example where we saw a real train wreck. A government contractor was filling out the services they were providing to one of their market segments. And they found a company that was a perfect fit. They provided all the services that would complement the acquiring company's strategic goals and objectives. But the company, the target company they found, had a very autocratic leader. And this autocratic leader made all the decisions for the company. Well, The acquiring company was a very consensus-oriented company, and they distributed decision-making to the senior management team. So lots of people were involved in decision-making, and the senior management team had a lot of autonomy. They said, well, this will be great. When we acquire this company, all these managers will blossom because now they will be able to make the decisions which they hadn't been able to make when the autocratic leader was head of the company. The acquisition went through, and now we had people who had been with the target company for 20 years. And in fact, they hadn't made a decision. So they procrastinated. They had difficulty making decisions. And when they finally made a decision, often it wasn't a good decision because they didn't seek consensus. They didn't seek other points of view. So here we had a company that had really good managers, but not great leaders. And we expected them to be good at something that, in fact, they hadn't done for the last 20 years. That was pretty unrealistic. So we found that this was not a success. And the whole company, unable to make decisions, really imploded, and it really didn't bring the value to the acquiring company that it had hoped in its overall objectives when it targeted this specific company. So make sure you truly understand the culture, because sometimes cultures don't mesh. Next, would you invite them to Sunday dinner? Well, this is a good question, and it's actually one that the head of corporate development at Xerox, Ray Schilling, asks. So what does it mean? Well, let me give you an example of a company who did not ask this question. An ag services company had acquired a company, and they found that this company had some unethical employees. And here's how they found out. One of the principals was riding along the road, and he saw one of the company's trucks sitting there, and a guy was selling things off the back of the truck. So he stopped to see what was going on, and sure enough, this individual was selling chemicals off the back of the truck. And so the principal and the person didn't recognize this person was one of the company owners, and the principal asked and said, well, where did you get these chemicals? And he said, well, I just finished up with this field and I had a little left over, so I saw an opportunity to sell these chemicals. Well, that would have been bad enough, but here's what was really happening. What the company employees were doing was they were taking the chemicals, they were siphoning about half of it out, they were filling it up with water. So for the customers, we're getting about half of what they paid for. And then with the half they had siphoned off, they would pay for it, they would sell it off the back of the truck and pocket the money that they were paid for these chemicals. Pretty unethical. Well, when the principals researched this, they found out that this practice wasn't just this one person doing it, but it was prevalent within the entire firm. So they had to fire a number of employees. Unfortunately, to add insult to injury, these employees, as they left the company, they stole the company list and they sabotaged the computer. But if this company had asked, before they acquired it, asked if would we invite these people to Sunday dinner, my guess is they probably would have said no. And when you say no to the Sunday dinner question, that's clearly a signal that you need to pay attention and ask questions, ask customers how they feel about these folks, ask suppliers what they think is going on, because typically when you have unethical behavior like this, people know about it in the community. And if you don't feel comfortable asking somebody to Sunday dinner, then that's a clear indication that something's wrong. Next, review the HR manual. Are there any policies that raise eyebrows? And sometimes it's not even something that raises eyebrows, but it's just something different than what you're used to. So let's say your company, like Yahoo, has decided that telecommuting is not the way you do business, and you acquire a firm that has a lot of telecommuters. Well, it's not that that policy is a bad one, but if you feel very strongly that people need to work in the office and you acquire this company, you have to understand that some of those telecommuters may leave because they see that as one of those true benefits. So looking at the HR manual tells you what's important for this company, what are some of the key things, policies, and procedures, and that too can also give you some insight into the company. And what is the turnover rate? And has that been increasing? That can tell you if the company's been deteriorating. And is the company culture deteriorating over time? So, human capital, company culture, that's another area you really need to take a look at. And this, in our research, has been an area which we found really does cause some major train wrecks. So make sure, in addition to meeting your strategic targets, your company cultures will actually mesh. The next area in the human capital area is key people. Who are the key people? And it's not just the senior management team. Ask customers. Who are the people who get things done for them? Ask your suppliers. Who are the people who are important? And ask how things get done at the company. And when someone's on vacation, who are the people who are missed? What processes stop when somebody's on vacation? This will give you some indication of who the key people are in addition to the senior management talent. It's important to understand who they are and what will keep them with the company. Do you have long-term agreements in place? Do you have non-competes? Are they genuinely happy? Who will walk just because they don't want to be part of a larger company? But in addition to that, is there a succession plan in place? And if there is one, how are the people listed on the succession plan? Are they really being mentioned? Or is the succession plan a plan only in title, not actually in action? How well are the people being cross-trained? And I've already mentioned this, are there non-competes in place? But it's important for you to understand the human capital issues. And the human capital issues, you need to look at the differential advantage. What are the key intellectual assets that set the company apart, and are they replicated in the company? What's the company culture? And looking at that company culture, is it something, are these two companies that will mesh? And then understanding what who the key people are, and will they stick with the company? And if they will, then your acquisition will be successful. But these are the three topics in the human capital area that I'd like you to walk away with. Okay, now that we've covered the human capital area, let's move on to the market position. Dana, were you going to say something?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Denise. Some good thoughts about what you just said. I especially like your emphasis on culture. It's truly one of the areas where combined companies can clash and cause turbulence for the acquisition. But what about market and industry dynamics?
Yes, this is one more area, and the market position is very important. So you'd say, well, surely everybody who goes after a target company would understand the market position. And sure enough, in our survey, we found most of the people who had acquisitions actually looked at market position. So why is this so important? Well, we asked a second question, and we found that 50% of the people who said they looked at market position said they wished they had dug deeper into market position and truly understood it better. And here's what we mean by this. So you need to understand the position of the company in the marketplace, but you need to dig deeper, and you need to look at each one of their market segments to see what their market position is in each one of the market segments. How many segments are they the number 1 or 2 player, the dominant player, and how many segments are they actually in the 4, 5, or 6 position? And why do we care? Well, we've learned in strategic planning that being the number 1 or 2 player is usually much more profitable than if you're back in the pack. And if you're back in the pack, sometimes your acquisition target will not allow you to achieve the goals and objectives that you've set out in your strategy. So let me give you an example, and I'm going to go back to the ag services company, you know, the one that had the unethical employees. Well, let's go back in history. Why was this company going out and looking for acquisition targets? Well, this was a company that had been very successful, and they had lots of money in their pocket. And they said, well, what are we going to do with this money? And acquisition seemed like the right idea. Well, we already know that when they acquired the company, they didn't really do a deep dive in understanding the industry culture, and they ended up with an unethical group of employees. But it actually was even worse than this. They bought a company that did not have a strong market position. And after 4 years of struggling with this acquisition and losing money year after year, we started developing a strategic plan. So I started working with them 4 years after the acquisition. So the very first thing you do in strategic planning is assess your market segments and your market position. And oh my goodness, we looked in these market segments and we found they might be as high as a 4 and they might be as low as a 10. Well, that explained their lack of success and their lack of profitability right there. And then I found there were a couple 800-pound gorillas roaming around this market. And the strategy this company was pursuing was go poking these 800-pound gorillas in the eye, which is usually not a really good strategy. So I said, okay, let's really understand the customer needs. Are there any unmet needs that we're uniquely positioned to meet? Because let's face it, we're not the biggest providers and we're certainly not the cheapest. What can we do to turn this tide? Well, as we truly started understanding the market needs, we found there was an unmet technology need that several of the different segments were looking at. And we identified the customers within those segments, and we developed the technology that would meet these customer needs. Now, during the process, we shrunk our customer group from 200 to 30 customers because we knew that most of the customers really didn't care about this technology. But for the 30 that we selected, as we developed this technology, we partnered with these customers. And good news for us, we became more profitable because these customers did business with us because what we were good at, and they were willing to pay us for what we were good at. And the good news for these 30 customers, they became more profitable because they became much more efficient and effective growers. But I wish I could tell you it took us a year to turn this around. The first year we identified the technology and we had to develop it. The second year we had to start using it and tuning it up. And it wasn't until the third and fourth year we actually saw increased profitability. Wow, that was a long time to turn an acquisition around. And had this company really looked at the market position and looked at each one of the core businesses and understood how weak its position was in this specific company, how weak this company had in each one of its market segments, this would not have been a good acquisition. So once again, when we developed our survey, we saw that many people considered market position, but over 50% of the people said they would spend a lot more time understanding this particular area of the acquisition process. Next, market and industry dynamics. You really need to understand the external factors. What's going on? Are there any game changers? Are there any new technology issues? So if you're a Swiss watch manufacturer and you're trying to buy other Swiss watch manufacturers and you totally miss the new Japanese technology that came in, you would have had some bad acquisition strategy because you would have just been undermined by all the new technology that the Japanese providers came in with. What about supplier issues? Let's say some of the market segments are dependent on a mineral like palladium, which mainly comes from Russia, and all of a sudden we no longer gain access to that particular mineral. Well, that's something you'd like to know before you finish your acquisition. The economy. Let's say you had been, during the housing bubble, you were targeting a company that had a construction segment that was serving, or a segment that was serving the construction market, and it was going gangbusters. Well, whenever you hear the word boom, you know there's going to be a bust. So before you acquire this company, you need to make sure you understand what that bust means to that particular segment, and will you be able to weather the storm as it collapses. And then new entrants. Will there be any new entrants in the market? So telephone companies for years have been providing us with telephone service. But if you were in this particular marketplace, would you have seen the cable companies coming in and how the whole market disrupted? That would have been an important thing to take a look at before you acquired a company that was in the telecommunications area. And are there changes in regulations? Are you prepared for them? Let's say you're acquiring a company that makes exhaust systems, but you know that the trucking emission standards are going out. Has your company already developed the technology that will enable you to meet these new trucking standards, or are they struggling to meet it? Are they positioned to succeed in the future? So it's important before you make the purchase to understand the industry dynamics and understand, are there issues going on outside with technology, suppliers, the economy, or regulations, or are there potential new markets, new entrants in the marketplace? And then finally, in the market, does your acquisition change the competitive landscape? Will the landscape change? And that is a good question. So let's take the example. Pepsi went out and bought Burger King, and the great news about that was Burger King immediately sold Pepsi in all its fast food restaurants. The bad news about that was McDonald's decided to buy Coke. Wendy's decided to buy Coke. And many of your other fast food chains went towards Coke because Pepsi now was aligned with one of their competitors. So that changed. That was how the competitive landscape changed through an acquisition. Will the target be more attractive to customers? So this is a positive thing that could happen. So let's say you're a small technology company and you're purchased by Microsoft or Oracle. And now many more people, you open up a new market because now people know you're not going to go out of business, so they feel more comfortable using your software that you're providing. Could there be conflict in your distribution channel? So this is not unusual. When you're acquiring a company for industry consolidation, that you have overlapping distribution channels. Well, this can make an acquisition very unsuccessful unless you have a strategy for your distribution channels, because your channels are not going to sell your products unless they really know what your plan is, because they know that you have to rationalize these channels, and if they think they're not going to be the one chosen to sell your product, they're just going to not bother. And if it takes you a year or two to sort this out, then you're going to have a very stagnant distribution channel. So this is important to get right on top of if your acquisition target is bringing with it a distribution channel disruption. Is there sufficient time available to integrate the two companies successful? So whenever your competitors hear that you have acquired a company, they immediately know that some of your attention is going to be focused internally. And if you can't really streamline the acquisition, this internal focus is going to allow them to get into some doors that were formerly closed to them. So make sure you have an integration process that allows you to integrate the companies and not lose sight of the marketplace and what's going on with your customers. Will there be market acceptance for the acquisition? Well, what happens if you go and you buy a company internationally? So you're expanding your capabilities internationally, and you buy a company that's in your market space. And this particular company sells to that local region's government or local country's government. But the minute they're acquired by a U.S. company, they turn around and no longer have this government business. So understand if the acquisition is actually going to change the customer's perception of the company and what impact that will have on the marketplace. And most importantly, do we have the ability to deal with any contingencies and unexpected events? Because if we know with any acquisition that there are going to be unexpected things that happen, and make sure that you're not so highly leveraged that you can't weather the storm for some unexpected event. So in conclusion, we wanted to take a look at 8 areas, and one that I want to emphasize is the acquisition objectives for evaluating each one of your candidates. We've identified 8 criteria that you need to really take a look at, and once again, these are strategic criteria. You of course need to go into the normal financial due diligence to make sure that everything is in place. But when we actually looked at why acquisition failed, we found that, and yes, in some cases it was because somebody didn't really look and do a deep dive in the financials, but more often than not, we found there was a miss on the strategic level. Make sure that as you're looking at your target, you talk to their customers, their suppliers, and other industry contacts, and you verify the information provided by the company. And this will help make sure that you have less unexpected things happen. And that's one of the important areas that you also need to consider. Another area where there's often failure is in the actual acquisition integration, and making sure, even if you've looked at all these other strategic issues up front in the strategic fit, human capital, and market and industry dynamics, that you really take the integration process seriously. So in order for you to do that, we're going to provide you with our article on acquisitions, developing a successful integration plan. And you can take it off of this website, but we're also going to send you a link in an email. Now, if you're thinking, as you heard this presentation, that you really need to tune up your strategy so that you have that criteria out there and you're making a good decision as to whether or not you should make versus buy, but once you've decided buy, you have some good criteria. If you feel like your strategic planning process is not providing you with that, we'd like to offer people who attend this webinar the ability to attend our Simplified Strategic Planning Seminar for $9.95, which is a significant discount off your regular price. And this will help you get positioned so that you have good strategic criteria so that when you go after your acquisition, you know if the target's a fit or not. And then, of course, we're more than happy to help you with full process consulting. But we've covered a lot of material today. Are there any questions?
Yes, Denise, a couple of questions have come in. First, you covered 8 criteria. Which ones do you think are the most important?
The 2 that I think are the most important are making sure you have your strategic goals and objectives stated up front with clarity and in writing, and constantly go back to your statements so you don't lose track. And then the second is, when we did the survey, we found so many people really missed understanding the market position, not just of the whole target company, but its market position in each market segment. And that was another big miss. So I would say those 2 were the most important.
Good, thank you. Another one, is there anything else you have seen that causes acquisitions to be unsuccessful?
Let me think about that for a minute. So we have our 8 criteria. Is there anything else? Yes, okay, there is one other thing that I've seen cause things go awry in acquisitions, and that's when a company has an inorganic growth goal. And so a senior management team, in order to meet their bonus by the end of the year, they have to meet this inorganic growth goal, and that means we have to buy something. We have to buy a product line, we have to buy a service, we need to buy a company. So in order to meet this target, I've seen some people go after acquisitions that once they're acquired, they really don't make a lot of sense. Now, on the surface, there was kind of a strategic fit, but when you really did a deep dive, this was not the right company. There were many other better choices. It just would have taken longer to pursue the other choices. And so if you're making an acquisition just to meet an inorganic goal, and you don't really look at these 8 criteria, you can really have a train wreck on your hands. So that would be one area that I see out there. Anything else?
I don't have any other questions from our listeners. I want to repeat the offer that Denise made. Remind people that we're welcoming attendees at a very special price of $9.95 to our strategic planning workshops in Troy and in Santa Ana, California. Please use the link, or it'll be in the follow-up email that you will receive. One other note with that is, in addition to a paid attendee, we will invite your president or CEO to attend at no charge with that paid attendee. We appreciate everybody listening, and if you're listening on an archived version and you wish to take advantage of the offer to attend the Simplified Strategic Planning seminars, please call Elizabeth Tidd at the number shown on the slide and in your email. We appreciate your attending, and we thank you for listening and for submitting questions. That will be the end of this broadcast. Thank you very much, everyone, and good afternoon.